Have you ever wanted to get involved in real estate development, but didn't know where to begin? Do you think real estate development is only for the large hedge funds or major corporations, the big guys? Or have you done some development in the past and are looking to scale up? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the W.I.R.E.D Wealth and Real Estate Development Podcast. I am your host, Nick Smith. Get ready to have your mind blown and rewired as we discuss all aspects of creating wealth and real estate development. Welcome all, welcome. This is Nick Smith. I am your host of the W.I.R.E.D Podcast. This is episode number 4, where we talk all things wealth and real estate development. Again, I encourage you all, if you get anything from this podcast or our YouTube channel, please feel free to subscribe. We'll have a website coming, so I encourage you all to support, share with your friends, share the episode, download. It will definitely help us in growing this podcast and helping us all learn how to build some wealth in real estate development. I am delighted today to have my good friend here, Milt, who is a native here, or not a native here of Northwest Indiana, but has been here long enough that we claim him now. He is the developer of the Brookstone Condominiums in Merrillville, Indiana. And I am going to let Milt just kind of introduce himself and give us a little background, how he ended up here in Northwest Indiana, and give us where this development journey started from.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick. Pleasure being here. I have lived in Northwest Indiana since 1962. I was born and raised on a cattle ranch in the state of Idaho. Not too many people know that. It's true. And I decided agriculture was not my thing. And when I was in college and I studied metallurgical engineering, I wound up at Inland Steel Company in East Chicago, where I had an interesting career for 35 years. Retired in 1997 and actually worked 6 more years at Bethlehem Steel as a consultant. But in the meantime, I did start my real estate journey in the early 80s. And it was sort of self-protection, if you will. The United States steel industry was in problems. They were getting their lunch handed to them by the Japanese steel companies. And many of the American mills were having to cut and shut down mills and so forth. Well, I felt that at that point, I should have some backup opportunities for me. So I got into real estate. I started buying rental property in the early 80s and continued to rehab single family houses and so forth for about the last 15 years or so of my career at Inland. Of course, doing it all part-time. And when I retired in 1997, I went full-time and found some property. I wanted to build, I'd always rehab single family, but I wanted to get into multifamily. I don't even know why now, but I decided I wanted to do it. So I had got an opportunity to buy some property in Merrillville. And I started from scratch with rehab experience, but not really new construction or development experience. But I thought with my background that I could do it. I've learned to listen when you don't know, because you learn a lot by listening to people instead of talking so much. And so I started in 1999, actually broke ground at Brookstone Condominiums in 1999. And brought on the first building in 2000 and was doing pretty well. Each building was 24 units, so I had 120 units constructed by 2007. And we all know what happened in late 07 and 08 when the real estate market tanked, and I wasn't so sure I made the right choice at that point.
Perfect time.
Yes, it was. But not to be dissuaded, I built a clubhouse in 08, but then I quit building for quite a while, for about 10 years, as a matter of fact. I became a realtor. I got my real estate license, and I also did some management of rental properties, some of my own and some of other people's. And in approximately 2019, I could see the market returning. So I started thinking about continuing on, but by then it had to be phase two of the project. The market had changed a lot in 10 years, and I felt that I needed to refresh, if you will, my building design and give buyers more of what they had told me they really wanted. And the number one thing the buyers had told me, because we did some market surveys of our buyers, was they wanted, I had detached garages in phase one, and people told me they loved the condos, but they didn't like walking to the garages in the wintertime. So they would like to have garages in a building. Well, in order to meet the price point in my market in Merrillville, I felt I had to build a pretty large building to get economies of scale. And so I hired my same architect. I used the same one I used in phase one. And we redesigned a brand new building that's unique really throughout Northwest Indiana. There's not another building like it. It's 26 condominiums and 26 garages within the condo. And it's 4 stories. And we started that building in May 2021. And here we are, mid 23. We're almost completed at this point. I'm looking forward to an open house here in just about a few weeks.
Awesome. I can definitely attest to the uniqueness of the property. Milt was gracious enough to give me a tour, so to speak, of the property, and it is definitely unique. It's one of the few of its kind, especially with the attached garages inside of the unit or inside the footprint of the property.
Mhm.
That's not common here. But I did want to go back to some things that you said when you talked about coming here, working in the steel mills. For those that don't know, those of my listeners that don't know this area, we're in Northwest Indiana, right next to Chicago, literally 30 to 45 minutes from Chicago, but probably 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. This area was saturated with the steel industry. It was the biggest employer of this area. And in our county, which is Lake County, the 3 largest cities of those times was Gary, Indiana, East Chicago, Indiana, and Hammond, Indiana.
Yes.
Those were the big 3 of Northwest Indiana. Those are the big 3. They had the steel mills, and the mill that Milt worked at was Inland Steel, which was in my hometown, East Chicago, Indiana. It was by far the biggest employer in the town at that time. I mean, everybody. I have family members that have worked and retired from Inland. It's now changed names several times since it was Inland Steel. But before you came to this area, had you even ever heard of East Chicago, Indiana?
I have never heard of Inland Steel, East Chicago, maybe never Indiana. Because I was a potato head from Idaho.
So what actually, because I'm sure you may, and I don't know, maybe you didn't get any other offers, but when you were offered the position at Inland and to come to this area, what attracted you to the area at that time?
Well, let me answer that by backing up just a little bit. I graduated college in 1962. And if you go back in history, in the late 50s or early 60s, I can't pinpoint the exact date, the Russians sent Sputnik up into space. And if you're old enough, you remember that very well. And it went up and it was circling the earth and going beep, beep. And it scared the Jesus out of the Americans because they thought the Russians, were going to invade from the sky, I guess. And it placed a high demand on engineering talent. And just as I graduated, engineers were in such hot demand, it was unbelievable. I could have had 50 offers, I think, if I'd have wanted. And we had a gentleman come in telling me about all the excitement of the steel industry. And he presented such a glowing picture of Inland Steel, and the salary was good. And all in all, I came back and visited the mill, and I kind of caught steel fever, if you will. And so I wound up at Inland Steel, and I was there for 35 years, as I say, until 1997.
And just so you all know, those steel mills, a lot of them, so Inland has changed name. Gary has U.S. Steel. But one of the mills he mentioned, Bethlehem Steel, that is no longer in existence, right?
No, that's correct. It's
No.
all part of Cleveland Cliffs.
Gotcha. Cleveland Cliffs, which is the new Inland Steel, basically. So those mills have definitely shrunken. They're much smaller than what they used to be as far as in employers, size. A lot of the mills now are really dormant. They really don't even use it. So that's the challenge with some of our Midwestern steel-oriented cities is how do we go from being a steel mill industry town to now moving into 2023, and what is going to drive the economies now in those cities.
Well, and I might just add I mentioned the steel industry American steel industry was in quite some problems in the early 80s when I started to get into real estate. The other factor at that point, and this is unfortunate, the steel companies, Inland included, were laying off workers because they were shutting down mills, and there was lots and lots of housing that was, I won't say abandoned, but it was in foreclosure or available purchase through HUD and other entities. And that's what I started to do. I started purchasing these foreclosed homes. At that time, I think the HUD process has changed quite a bit over the years, but at that time, you submitted a silent written bid, if you will. You actually bid on the property. And if you were good enough to be the high bidder, you got it. And of course, the trick was to not bid too high, and so you wouldn't lose your shirt. And I got pretty good at it, actually. And I actually focused on an area of Ammon called the Schleicher subdivision, which is a subdivision near the old Gavin High School, which now is gone as well. But it was an area of 2-3 bedroom slab homes, and they were nice homes. And it was a nice neighborhood, and it was fairly near where I lived. And so I did most of my rehabbing work in that Schleicher subdivision.
And it's interesting, we kind of see our generations intersecting. As Milton explains, that 80s period, that's when I came into the world in the 80s. And I saw the decline. I didn't see those, areas at their peak. I saw the decline. I saw, downtown Gary kind of at its worst. I saw East Chicago, downtown East Chicago, when they kind of imploded, so to speak. They were thriving. I look back at an old yearbook of my parents, my mother, who graduated from East Chicago, Washington in 1970. And there were so many businesses in downtown. They had taken out their ads, clothing stores, all that. When I came up, downtown East Chicago was deserted. There was a lot of vacant and abandoned properties. Gary, same way. Downtown Hammond has suffered, but all of those areas are seeing some turnaround now. They're seeing some reinvestment, and they're seeing some turnaround. And that's why I'm bullish Northwest Indiana. I'm bullish on Northwest Indiana.
Well, I am too. I'm very bullish on Northwest Indiana. I'm president of the MLS division of W.I.R.E.D, which is Northern Indiana Realtor Association. And Indiana has a low tax base, and we have inexpensive housing compared to our neighboring state of Illinois. And frankly, I think we have a more stable state government, and we're getting a lot of move-ins from the state of Illinois, which Indiana and the local Realtor Association has encouraged with some advertising campaigns that aimed at the Chicago market. And so I think from that standpoint, the real estate market in Northwest Indiana has held up remarkably well in the last several years. And I see no let up in it. In fact, I put one of my phase 1 condominiums I put on the market yesterday, and I had it sold this morning. Someone came in and saw that and immediately said, I want it, and put an offer in, and it was accepted, and I sold it in less than 24 hours.
Wow. So let's fast forward. We were in the 80s. started buying property, you were doing HUDs. I heard at that time, did you actually have to go to the HUD office to submit a bid? Did you actually have to go to the office?
No, I don't recall going to the HUD office, but I don't remember exactly how I submitted the bids now, but it was a bid process. I don't remember whether it was prior to email, so it couldn't have been email. I don't know whether you had to mail it in. I can't quite recall how I did it.
Okay.
That's how I did it.
So we fast forward now to the early 2000s when development bug hit you.
Yeah.
You got hit by the development bug. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember us having this discussion before. But you tried to put that development in another community before it landed in Merrillville.
I did, yes. I had an opportunity to buy some property in Highland. It wouldn't have been the size of, it turned out to be Brookstone, but it would have been big enough for one or two buildings. And town council, every town is different in the way they view rental properties. And at that time, Highland turned out to be rather negative toward rental properties. And they turned me down. And at that point, I guess I'm someone that just says, let never die. When somebody turns me down, then you get that much tougher and work that much harder. And so I went out and found property in Merrillville, which turned out to be a blessing, actually, because it was quite a bit more acreage. And it's allowed me to build a much bigger complex than I would have ever been able to build in Highland.
How far had you got along in the process with Highland before they shut you down?
I had an option to purchase the land, and I had a plan for the building. And we went to the Plan Commission of Highland. I got approved at the town commission level and went to the town council. And one resident in particular, which I would have been a neighbor to, decided he was opposed to the project. And frankly, he had more clout in Highland than I did. And Highland Town Council turned me down. That whole process probably took maybe 9 months. That's the time I got out finally and got a vote at the Highland Town Council. I went to Merrillville. I learned a couple of things in that. Number one, I don't want to mention names or personalities, but I didn't feel I had the right attorney handling the case. What I learned in that is there are real estate attorneys and there are not so real estate attorneys. And if you're going to hire an attorney, you better have a real estate attorney. And when I went to Merrillville, I made sure I hired a real estate attorney. Subsequent to that, my son is now an attorney and he's a real estate attorney. But he wasn't around in those days to help me then. But that made it quite a difference. And plus the fact Merrillville was more receptive to rental properties than Highland was. So I had to jump through hoops. I had to prove to Merrillville Plan Commission, the town council, and everything else that, I was serious and they liked the plans. I did have a problem there. Merrillville has a separate sanitary district. In fact, they have two separate sanitary districts that were in a bit of a squabble between the two of them. I got caught in the middle of that, which delayed me about 6 months before they finally decided to make up and allowed me to go forward. But they're independent of the town. Town said, well, as soon as you get the sewer guys to give you a permit, we're good too. And so it took about a year, over a year to get through Merrillville because of that sewers.
Wow. So when did you actually break ground on phase one of Brookstone?
In the fall of 1999.
Okay. Fall of 1999. And you actually built through when?
We had an open house that summer in August or September of that summer of 2000.
Okay.
We built all winter long. We broke ground in September, October, poured the slab. I remember pouring the slab the day before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Because I was out on the slab after I was walking the slab on Thanksgiving. A buddy of mine wanted to see what I was up to. I took him out and showed him the slab on Thanksgiving Day. And then we started building after that.
Wow. So how many buildings and how many units are actually in phase one?
5 buildings. Each building is 24 units. The garages are all detached. And so that's 120 units. And then I built in 2008, I built a clubhouse.
Okay. And again, perfect time because it hit right at the recession, but you had completed everything kind of right before the
I
recession
did.
hit.
I had completed building 5, the last of the 5 buildings. I hadn't sold all of the last building. I'd only sold about a third of it when the market tanked. And the thing about that market collapse, it almost happened overnight. I remember very well the last 3 sales I had in that last building, number 5, were in September of 2007. I had 3 in 1 month. And then October came along and that was it. There was another sale in that building for years.
Wow.
That's how drastic that market collapsed. And it was because of lack of controls in the mortgage industry. There were mortgage companies just going wacko, issuing loans to people. I heard stories of, we'll loan you money to buy a house. And oh, yeah, you need a boat and a RV too. And we'll loan you all of that because in 5 years you'll rebuild or buy another one and you'll be able to sell what you've got for more money. And it was a big pyramid scheme and it came crushing down suddenly in late fall of 2007. Now, subsequent to that, the Dodd-Frank Act and some other acts have tightened up that mortgage market, mortgage criteria, I should say. And some say maybe too tight, but I think there has been a little bit of loosening of that market. But certainly that mortgage situation caused that crash in '08. I hope never to see that happen again.
Neither do I. I want to see it. Even though I said I was graduating college and in college during that era, during that period. So I kind of missed certain aspects and certain portions of it. But my sister at the time, she's a few years older than me. She was a mortgage broker at that time. So it was, for lack of better terms, it was definitely interesting to be a mortgage broker at that time. Because literally, day by day, she would say she would get messages that this lender has closed their doors. This lender has closed their doors. She would get multiple of those emails day by day. So that was an interesting period. And we talk about that period and kind of compare it to where we are. A lot of people are saying, we're on the brink of a recession. I hear it everywhere. Some people say we are, some people say we are. There is a kind of hodgepodge of opinions about where we are in the economy, where the housing market is. When people say we're due a recession, we haven't had one in a long time. We're due one. I'm just curious, what do you think? Because granted, the mortgage industry has drastically changed since that period.
Right. Yeah.
And that was 100% the big reason why the market fell at that time. But given that and given where we are in the market right now, where do you kind of foresee the real estate market in the next, I say, 3 to 5 years? And so do you think we're heading for a meltdown?
I do not think we're headed for a serious meltdown. And again, I think there's 2 answers to that question. The local answer is that I think Northwest Indiana is going to go through it very well. Now, there's no doubt that the Fed, which has raised rates, 8 or 10 times in the last 2 years, has driven mortgage rates up into the high 6% range, almost 7%. And that definitely has slowed down the market. Although it is interesting that Northwest Indiana seems to be riding that pretty well because of the things I've already mentioned. But as to the recession, I study the market, the stock market and the financial market pretty closely. And there seems to be a growing feeling that the Fed has probably reached the end of the raising of their rates, and that the recession, if it happens, will probably be a soft landing. And by a soft landing, it kind of means that the recession is just a little bit of a slowdown. I think the key will be employment. If people start getting laid off, then it could get serious. But there seems to be a shortage of, there's help wanted signs everywhere. So I don't think that'll happen. And the latest predictions that I've seen from some of the financial press that I follow is a soft landing toward the end of this year from 3 to 6 months, which a soft landing is hardly anything. I don't think I really don't believe it'll affect the real estate market. Mortgage rates are going to affect the real estate market far more, particularly in Northwest Indiana, than a recession or a hint of recession.
I definitely appreciate that insight and your opinion. It's going to be interesting. That's what I'm saying. I think it's going to be interesting. I think, given what happened during the pandemic, when so much money was distributed and put in the economy, that hyperinflation, we still have not really kept that under control.
No, we haven't. That's true. Hyperinflation.
It's still crazy. I looked at gas prices just today and I'm realizing that they went up.
Well, that's why the Fed raised the rates as they did. They have to bring. But even so, inflation is only about 4%. Now, it's not like some third world country where it's 100% or 500%. It's 4%. The Fed wants to bring it down to 2%, but 4%, relatively speaking, on a worldwide basis is controllable.
Not bad, not bad. So we get back to 2008. You get the last building completed. How were you able? Now, were all of the other buildings sold out at that point?
Yes, pretty much.
Okay. So this last building, you sell a third of the building.
Right.
Well, you still got 2/3 left. Economy crashes. What do?
Well, people still have to have a place to live. And one nice thing about the style of condominium that I built, it's a cousin of an apartment building.
Right.
So I rent. That's how I survived. I rented those empty units. People were more than happy to rent a nice condo. Got fine market rents. But that whole time if I hadn't been able to rent those condos, I probably wouldn't have survived that downturn. But I survived it in pretty good stead. And the other thing about condos is condos tend to attract the young buyer who has not established a family yet, or the senior buyers that say 50 plus, at least, that want a place to retire, semi-retire at least in. And what happens is the younger buyers come in, they buy a condo, they might live there for 4 or 5 years or so, and they get married and start a family or buy a house and move to a house. Most of them don't want to sell that condo. They want to keep it as an investment. And so I got and I was already into the rental management market, and I had been doing that for years. So it was a natural turn to help people out, rent their condos. And to this day, I'm still doing that. And that's how I survived that downturn for those 10 years. And it was a happy happenstance, I guess.
Right. No, so the big thing, I think the big takeaway that we, have to take away from that or get from that is got to be able to pivot when the market shifts, the market changes. I don't know if it was intentional foresight or if that's just the way it worked by you being able to rent those, because a lot of HOAs, two things they don't allow is rentals. A lot of HOAs and condos, or they cap the amount of rentals that can be in the development. So they don't like rentals a lot. And also FHA finance. A lot of condo complexes cannot accept or allow FHA financing for buyers. But you were able to pivot. And speaking of FHA financing, one of the unique things about Brookstone that I know is that Brookstone is both FHA and VA approved.
That's right. And it's not an easy process.
I want to ask you, what was that process?
Well, VA is not so difficult. FHA makes you jump through hoops. Now, FHA has changed some things in the last few years. It used to be if you could get approved, you had to ask for reapproval every 2 years. They've increased that to every 3 years, so that makes it a little easier. And in order to qualify for most mortgage loans, FHA mortgage loans, you could have up to 50% rentals. It used to be, I believe, 10%. And that was a severe restriction. Now you can get up to 50% rentals. And so and I know Brookstone is nowhere near that. We're maybe a little over 10 or 12, maybe.
Okay.
But it wasn't easy. I'd say we felt that we had to have FHA approval in our particular market. It's a blue collar market, and we wanted to open up the avenues for people to get mortgages, and FHA is one of those. And some people consider FHA as a negative. I do not feel that way whatsoever. I think it's a positive. I don't, VA, for example, if you're a veteran, that's what you want to do. Why that no one thinks of that as a negative. And I certainly don't either. That's VA. I'm more than happy to work with VA loans or FHA at that point. So, and in fact, I am applying for FHA and VA approval on my new building, which is a bit of a different process. And I have on the old buildings, we more or less did it ourselves. I worked with the current HOA at that point and myself as a developer to get approval for FHA. On this new building, I worked with a mortgage lender and some knowledge of how to get FHA approval. And they've helped me a great deal. And we feel we will get FHA approval on the new building.
Nice. No, that's a hole in the market. I definitely say that you're feeling is putting SHA, getting FHA approved, being able to accept FHA financing. And I think a lot of it is misinformation and miseducation for realtors, just to be. A lot of realtors try to sway away their sellers from accepting FHA and VA, because FHA and VA are a little bit more stringent when it comes to property condition than a conventional buyer. But I don't think those should be reasons, unless the property is just in deplorable condition. Well, of course, it wouldn't pass FHA and VA, but I don't think those should be reasons why people should sway away accepting FHA and VA buyers. None.
And I agree with that. And I've heard some realtors, the FHA is difficult. Well, not really. I don't find FHA any more difficult than conventionals. A lot of it depends on the mortgage broker or the lender themselves. Some lenders are easier to work with than others. We all know that in the realty field.
All right. So that's phase one. Now we're moving on to phase two. You took kind of a 10-year hiatus.
Right, just about there.
10-year break. And moving to phase two. First, let me ask you, without revealing your age, unless you want to, but at your season of life, what intrigued you or even gave you the unction to want to undertake a second phase?
Well, number one, I'm in fairly decent health for my age. And I'm in my 80s. You can figure that out by little simple mathematics. But I enjoy it. To me, it's not work. It's not work if you enjoy it. And I enjoy the challenge of development. I have a young man as my assistant who is doing an outstanding job for me. And I run a pretty lean ship. There's only 3 of us in my company. Myself, my office manager, who is my bookkeeper and runs the office and keeps us all straight, and my assistant, who is now building manager for that building, and myself as a developer. And I enjoy it. I enjoy going to work and every day, and the challenges, and even on the bad days, I enjoy it. But at the same time, at my age, I think this probably will be my last project.
Okay. Given that, what is the total footprint, or what's the total plan for this phase two?
Well, it's again 5 buildings. These are larger buildings than phase one. These are 26 condo buildings. They're 4-story because of the parking garages that are on the ground floor of these buildings. So the 5 buildings will be a total of 130 units when it's all built out. It will be a separate HOA from the first HOA by the state of Indiana law. The developer has to turn an HOA over to the residents after 10 years. So since I started phase one in 2000. In 2010, I turned it over to the residents of phase one. So it's well past that now. We're in 2023. So the new buildings will be a separate HOA. And now my attorney is my son, who is writing decks and rules and regs and so forth for this new complex.
Not bad to have a real estate attorney as your son. Not bad at all.
That's true. Very true.
There are some advantages attached to that.
For sure.
So in second phase, do you envision, or when do you envision, or do you kind of want to see what happens with this first building before you break ground on the second building?
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about this market. I think it's strong. Every realtor I talk with thinks it's strong. And we continue to see buyers coming from Illinois. I believe when I have the open house for this building, it will prove to be a strong selling building. Time will tell. I certainly hope I'm correct. And the fact that I was able to put a condo on the market yesterday in phase one and have the first buyer walked in, buy it in less than 24 hours tells me that market is still out there.
Right.
And frankly, I didn't count. I think we had 17 inquiries on that building in less than 24 hours. And as I say, the first person that walked in bought the condo. So that tells me that if you're priced proper, that's the key. If you price your property correctly, I believe, it will sell it fine in this market, Northwest Indiana. If you try to gouge or set the price too high, now that the interest rates are higher, people are smart. They are not going to be paying. They crunch the numbers, and at 6% or 7% interest, they're going to be paying a lot more mortgage payment than at 3 or 4%. And so you better have a product that's priced right, or you'll sit there and not be able to sell it. And in the long run, you'll wind up getting less for it than you would have if you'd have priced it right in the first place.
100% agree. Tell a lot of people, you price it right, buyers will come.
Yes, they will.
They will come. But as the saying goes, some people don't believe fat meat is great. So
that's probably true.
that is what I have experienced. So with this one, so there's a almost 10-year gap. What has been some of the biggest differences in phase one versus phase two? I'm sure construction.
Well, I can say without hesitation that this building has been more difficult to build than any of the other buildings, maybe all of them put together. This has been a very difficult construction period. The inflation factor for construction products, I'm sure people watch the market at all know that 2 years ago, lumber prices went through the roof. Now they're back down, a little higher than they used to be, but at least they're back down to more reasonable levels. Everything is at a higher cost than it was 3-4 years ago, everything. And then deliveries during the and then of course, in the pandemic that hit in the spring of 2020, goofed up all of the deliveries and really started price increases. When people couldn't get product, it bit the price up. So between price increases, delivery problems, and even labor problems, because, for example, my framing crew, when I finally could get lumber shipped to me, the framing crew had been delayed so many times, they went to another project, and I lost them for about 3 weeks. So this project, I am in I believe my 17th month now, and I never went past 10 months on building any of the previous phase one building. So I'm almost double the time. Now, I do believe when you go to a 4-story building, structurally, it gets more difficult to build. There's a lot of structural issues that I never faced in phase one with the 3-story buildings. but it has been much more difficult. Let me just leave it at that.
Okay. And difficult, but not impossible.
That's correct. Not in, well, we are where we are, almost ready for the open house.
Difficult, but not impossible. How important has, because again, you have to work with town of Merrillville for phase one, and you're also working with town of Merrillville again in phase two. How important is it how important is it to establish good working relationships with the town that you are doing business in?
Well, that's everything. It's extremely important. I have worked very hard to have good relationship with Merrillville. Merrillville has been good to me, I think, and because I've tried to be good to Merrillville. If an inspector comes in and says, Milt, that's not quite right, we fix it. We don't debate it, we fix it. And I think the town has appreciated that. So I have good rapport with the town officials. And I think that's just absolutely vital. If you're going to be a developer, you better be on pretty good terms. Now, I didn't have any relationship with Merrillville when I first started, but what I learned from my Highland experience was I needed a good real estate attorney and one that had credibility with the town. And I found that attorney. I interviewed several attorneys. I made no bones about it. I wanted an attorney that had credibility with the town of Merrillville and knew real estate. And I found that attorney, and he paved the way. And I remember I mentioned to you the sewer, in the middle of a sewer fight between the two sewer districts for about 6 months. I remember very well him attending one of those meetings with me, and he put his foot down. Folks, and there was just not me. There was 2 or 3 other developers that they had been holding up for several months. And we threatened some strong action if they didn't come to the table, and they finally did come to the table. They act independently of the town. The town had already had approval from the town as soon as I could get the sewer permit, which after they came to terms, I was able to get that. And now I have excellent terms with the sewer department. The last time I went to get a sewer permit for this new building, it took me all of maybe 10 minutes.
Wow. Relationships are important, people. Relationships are the name of the game. And speaking of relationships, this is actually how Milt and I are connected. I've been a member of an organization called NICEA, Northwest Indiana Creative Investors Association, since about 2015, 2016, somewhere. When I joined, Milt had been for quite a while, treasurer of that organization. And we actually served on the executive board of that organization for a couple of years. I did mine in 2 years and let it go. And I know Milt recently came up to be board as well. But relationships, this is the name of the game in real estate. You have to build relationships. And the only way you build relationships is you get out there and you rub elbows with people. There's no way to be a real estate anything and not talk to people and not want to get out there and rub some elbows. Milt, we're coming up on time. I do not want to keep you on to stay within the time frame that I mentioned you. What parting words or what words of advice would you give to somebody that wanted to take on development, they want to do their first project? What would be kind of some parting words of wisdom that you've given?
Well, do your homework. You're going to have to study availability of land. Unless you're doing a rehab project on some other building, you're going to have to find land. You're going to have to find what the town wants or doesn't want for development. If you start from scratch, you're probably going to need architectural and possibly engineering help. So you're going to have to do your homework. There's a lot of work involved. You don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I want to be a developer, and it automatically happens. You've got to work at it, and you've got to do your homework before you'll ever get to the point where you'll get approval and put a shovel in the ground. I worked for about 3 years on this new building before we put the first shovel in the ground. And of course, get financing too. Getting financing, the bigger the project, the more difficult financing is to get. And I had some difficulties getting financing, but eventually was able to get it for this new project. So that's the primary thing I would say is do your homework.
Well, Milt, I definitely want to thank you again for taking time to chat with us here at W.I.R.E.D Nation, Wealth Real Estate Development. Thanks again. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, feel free to share this episode, subscribe, join us on YouTube, where we are there again every Thursday. We'll be releasing new episodes. So again, thanks for your time. And you all, let's go get wired up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share this content with someone else who would benefit from it. I'm looking forward to having you with me on the next episode. Now go out and create some wealth and real estate development.